If you're shopping for a streetable summer ultra high performance tyre, it's probably going to be one of these four tyres you're looking at, which is the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S, the Continental SportContact 7, the Bridgestone Potenza Sport, and of course the Goodyear Eagle F1 Asymmetric 6. These are four of my favourite tyres ever, and I have driven a lot of tyres. However, there might now be a fifth contender, and it's this. This is the new Pirelli P Zero PZ5. Pirelli claim it builds on the brilliance of the PZ4, which was excellent handling, but just adds a little bit more grip. Some more dry grip, more wet grip, better rolling resistance, more longevity. It could be the new king of ultra high performance tyres if Pirelli are to be believed, but I'm not in the habit of just believing tyre companies, I'm in the habit of testing. So I will be testing this tyre against these four, plus a Falken and a budget I've not tested before, to find out if this tyre really is as good as Pirelli claim. We'll be testing in the dry, wet, noise comfort, rolling resistance, everything you need to know about this tyre. So let's get on with the testing. Wet performance. Now, the wet performance in tyre tests is very important, even if you don't think so, which is why you can go to the Tyre Reviews website and change the score weighting of this test to find your perfect tyre, or I guess just watch the rest of the video. But tyre companies focus a lot of their efforts on wet performance of the tyres because that's where a tyre can really make the difference, and it's a very safety critical aspect. And when I said tyre companies, I mean most tyre companies, because there is a tyre in this test aptly named Sunny, and I can only assume that's because they only intended it to work in sunny conditions. Yes, it is the budget tyre. Yes, it is pretty bad in the wet. Not only did it have very little grip, it was the only tyre in this test that made this Golf have oversteer, especially in the slalom. But the budget tyre felt sloppy, lack of grip, and also I scared myself a few times oversteering towards these very close barriers. Don't fit. Apart from the Sunny, every other tyre in this test was either great or really great, which is wonderful, so let's talk about them. Next up was the Michelin and Goodyear. Now, I've spoken about the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S many times before. It is the oldest tyre in the test now. And like previously, it is a very, very safe, stable, predictable tyre, but it does like to understeer, and it doesn't quite have the peak grip of the other tyres. And to Delta, when you're testing, you've got your performance box data logger that's telling you where you are to the reference lap, and in the long corners where you're really relying on the front tyres, you're just giving up time. You can see the time bleeding away. So that's where the Michelin was slow. I know there's a new version coming soon at some point, hopefully, and I look forward to that. The Goodyear, now you know the Goodyear Eagle F1 Asymmetric 6 is a tyre I've recommended a load. It's a tyre I always enjoy driving, and once again the car felt a bit more sporty, a little bit more precise on the front end. You could even get the back to play a little bit if you were really intentful about it, which I love, so it was an enjoyable driving experience. But like the Michelin, it's one of the older tyres in this test now, and I'm guessing the game has moved on. So, speaking of the game moving on, the next two tyres were a surprise. It was the Falken and the Continental. Now, the Falken FK520, I have checked since doing the driving, between driving and telling you about the driving, and the FK520 hasn't quite tested as well as I found it, but I had another driver run this entire test, and he found exactly the same thing. The FK520 has significantly more grip than the tyres before it, and while it wasn't super sporty, the steering reactions weren't fabulous, it was just so stable and had grip, and it wasn't upset by the deeper water. Really impressive job by Falken with the 520, a good step on from the 510. Now the Continental SportContact 7 is the other surprise. That tyre has absolutely been stomping not only my tests, but every test it's been in the wet. But again, compared to the very new tyres in this test, it did lack a little bit of ultimate grip, which meant, like the Michelin, you were just understeering a bit through the corners. It was still a lovely tyre to drive, and the margins are now very, very small, but the Continental, at least in this test, in these conditions, on this circuit, on this car, in this tyre size, isn't the best anymore. The next tyre is the newest tyre in the test, and that is the Pirelli P Zero PZ5. Now, when driving, I was like, this is everything I want a tyre to be. It felt like the Goodyear, which you know is a tyre I love, but it felt like its big brother. It was direct and communicative, and the steering was nice, and the grip was fabulous, and I finished the lap, I was like, that is everything I want in a tyre. No tyre in this test is going to go around better than that. At the time, I obviously didn't know it was the Pirelli. I was just mighty impressed with this tyre, and it was It all round, everything you'd want. Like I said, like the Goodyear Eagle F1 Asymmetric 6, but just grippier and a little bit more precise. And then the final tyre I tested turned out to be the Bridgestone Potenza Sport. I don't know what Bridgestone have done here. You dug into the surface like it was dry. There was just no hint of water at all when you were driving, other than the water spraying up everywhere in my face. The grip levels were monumental. Like, I got out of the car and I was like, that's not real. Like, I've forgotten how to drive on all of the other sets and then remembered on the last set, that's wrong, which is why I got another test driver to run the test. And he got out of the car after driving to Bridgestone and he was like, what? I was like, what? It's very impressive, but let's not take anything away from the other tyres in this test. From Michelin up, they're all very good in the way. I think you'd generally be happy with any of them.
And you'd be happy with most of them in wet braking. Pirelli took the top spot, however again the top 6 tyres were very close. The budget tyre stopped the car nearly 10 metres later, which is a huge difference in grip. The Goodyear was the best over the 2 aquaplaning tests, with the Pirelli also performing very well. The budget tyre again really struggled, particularly with low curved aquaplaning resistance.
Dry handling. Now, I'm assuming that's why you're here. These are ultra high performance summer tyres. You want to know how they feel carving up your favourite road or even on track, as they do get used on track. Well, the good news is I can be brief about the budget. It wasn't very good. Surprise understeer, not very stable at the rear and pretty slow. So let's brush that under the carpet. I'm sure none of you are actually considering buying it. Next up was the Falken. Now, the Falken felt very solid sub-limits, and when we're doing lane changes and things like that to see how the tyre would be at sub-limit driving or soft handling, didn't light my pants on fire. It wasn't super exciting, but it was pretty predictable and nice. And then as we got on the lap, it was pretty much more of the same. It wasn't the most sporty of all the tyres, but it got round and had good grip. No surprises, which is important, safe balance. Next was the Michelin and the Goodyear. Now, the Michelin was a little bit lighter on the steering than the Goodyear, especially sub-limit, but sub-limit, everything happened predictably and wonderfully. At the limit, the Michelin actually in this size, I didn't really have as much negative to say about it as I have in other sizes. I thought it was very good. Perhaps just wanted a little bit more front axle bite, but otherwise fine. The Goodyear, we know the Asymmetric 6 is one of my favorites, and once again, it just seemed to do everything well. I think maybe sub-limit, it was ever so slightly behind the Michelin, but that's not a criticism because the Michelin was one of the very best sub-limit. But post-limit, I liked the Goodyear. You just felt like you were at one with the vehicle. You were one with the vehicle and the tyre, and everything you expected to happen did happen. Finally, there was the Continental, Bridgestone and Pirelli. And all of these were the 3 best tyres, and they were all absolutely wonderful, but they all had some slight drawbacks. The Continental, monumental grip and sub-limit, the steering felt very quick and precise. But once you got into the corner and you were really pushing it, it lacked a little bit of stability. It just felt like the car was moving ever so slightly more on the tyre than on the other 2. And that was the negative of the Continental. Next up was the Bridgestone. Now, the Bridgestone's drawback was notifications, was feedback. It lacked, compared to the other 2, just a tiny bit of feedback, what I call corner entry, mid-corner, when you're trying to play with the throttle so you know whether you can tuck the nose or not. And you just felt you were a little bit numb. It was a little bit missing compared to the Continental and Pirelli, but otherwise the steering reactions and the grip was bonkers. And then finally there was the Pirelli. Now, the Pirelli's drawback was the steering just felt a little bit like sub-limit, but once you were into the turn and into the corner, it felt like it was digging and it was predictable, and it was really, really lovely. So those 3 tyres, the times, the reason I'm talking about them so much being differently subjectively is the times were essentially identical across the 3. The first lap of the Pirelli and the Bridgestone was actually identical, but then the second lap, the Bridgestone lost a little bit more time than the Pirelli. So of the 3, the Pirelli was the fastest overall in this scenario, but really the gap is so small, I wouldn't really look at the lap times, and it's more what you want from a tyre. And honestly, I'm not sure I could tell you which is my favourite of the 3. They all had positives, they all had negatives. I'm assuming the 3 things I want from all of them can't exist in one tyre, because otherwise someone would have made it. But honestly, the Pirelli was amazing, the Bridgestone was amazing, the Conti was amazing, the Goodyear was amazing, the Michelin was amazing, the Falken was stable, the budget was crap. it's getting good. Tyres are getting really, really close, and there's never been a better time to be a tyre enthusiast because they're all so good, they're all so fast, they're all so grippy, but they all have their own personality. So I suggest you try them all on track, try them all in dry handling, and then let me know which one you like. But moving on, let's get on with the braking.
The Continental narrowly beat the Pirelli to take the top spot in dry braking, but again, everything was so close. The Falken did outperform its dry handling result to take third in dry braking, and the budget tyre was again very poor.
Moving on to noise and comfort, and I'm assuming at this point you will not be shocked to learn that it was very close. The quietest tyre in test was the Goodyear, very closely followed by the Falken. Then the Pirelli and Continental did well, Bridgestone was fine, and the Michelin and Sunny finished just over 2 decibels louder than the Goodyear. That's not insignificant, but it's also not huge considering this is an external noise measurement. Let's put it this way, I didn't notice anything in the car when we were doing our subjective noise and comfort testing. Speaking of which, for comfort, Pirelli, Continental and Michelin had a tiny lead over Falken and Goodyear on the big impacts, but really there was nothing between the best 5. The Bridgestone was, as usual, just a little bit firmer than the rest. The budget Sunny had the lowest rolling resistance of the test, which is neat. Anyway, of the tyres that actually had grip, the Goodyear and Michelin had the lowest energy use. However, the Continental, Pirelli and Falken were so close, I would in no way base my purchase decision on energy use, apart from maybe the Bridgestone. It was 30% worse than the best, in a shockingly high result. In fact, it was so high we tested 2 different tyres and both had the same results. This is a strange one. We'll get to it in a minute. As I touched on earlier, for the final results, I've put a little bit more score weighting on the wet performance of the tyres, but you can go to the Tyre Reviews website linked in the description and work out your own results. Be sure to leave a review while you're there, please. It will be no surprise that the budget Sunny NA305 finished in last place and was the worst in everything bar NVH and rolling resistance. It wasn't just a little bit worse, it was 40% off in wet braking, which is tragic. When braking from motorway speeds, where you'd be stopped on the Pirelli, you'd still be doing 70 kilometers an hour on the Sunny. Well, that's bad. Think about hitting a stationary car at 70. Now onto the results of the tyres that had grip, where everything was very close. The Bridgestone Potenza Sport might have been amazing in the wet, and as always, it is a very nice handling tyre, but the rolling resistance level of this tyre is not just awkwardly high, but is now being legislated out of production in the European Union thanks to new label targets, making the test of this sadly a little bit redundant. Also, as we've seen plenty before, the outer shoulder of the tyre did not hold up well to track work, so I hope any update they make to improve the rolling resistance will address that issue too. I really like the Potenza Sport as a fast road tyre as it steers so nicely. If they can fix the rolling resistance and track wear without changing the sporty nature of the tyre, it could easily end up being one of my favourite tyres. The Falken Azenis FK520 performed well in the grip test. It was low noise and the best in straight aquaplaning. Oddly, it did struggle a little bit more in curved aquaplaning and wasn't at the very top for comfort, but I definitely call it a solid, safe tyre. The main drawback, for me at least, and probably you as you're watching this, is it's just not a very dynamic tyre. So while you have good grip, it's just not much fun using it. So if you consider yourself a driver, keep that in mind. But for other applications, such as like your everyday cruiser, it offers really good value. The next 3 tyres are all really excellent. The Goodyear Eagle F1 Asymmetric 6, Michelin Pilot Sport 4S and the Continental SportContact 7. They all finished within 0.5% of each other, and honestly, I don't know which I like best. Everything I'm about to say about these tyres is really just splitting hairs. There's no major drawbacks to any of them really. The Goodyear, as always, is a super nice tyre to drive. It didn't quite match the best in braking, but in handling, comfort, noise and rolling resistance, it was there. I really like this tyre, and of the top 4, it's usually the cheapest. It's really fantastic. The Michelin Pilot Sport 4S is another really well-rounded tyre, super safe and dynamic, especially sub-limit where the steering's really nice, it builds up beautifully. At the limit, it still quite isn't the sportiest of the bunch, but if you're not going to go on track a lot, it's really difficult not to recommend this tyre, so I am recommending it highly. Finally, the Continental SportContact 7 was once again right at the front of yet another test, having huge amounts of grip in the dry, excellent comfort, nice quick steering. It's just a good tyre. In this 18-inch size on a Golf, it wasn't quite as well balanced around the limit as I remember the 19-inch fitment I've tested previously, but even with an average aquaplaning performance, it's still right at the front of the overall result, so another fantastic option. Like I said, I'm really just splitting hairs. I challenge any of you to fit the Goodyear, Michelin or Continental and be unhappy with your choice. But there is another tyre in this test. The newest tyre in the test, and what has turned out to be the best tyre in this test. It is of course the new Pirelli P Zero PZ5. It was the best overall in the dry, even if the steering was a touch lighter at the very limit than I'd ideally want. Joint best in the wet, scoring well both in the shallow and the deep water test, and had excellent comforts, though the margin was small. Its rolling resistance was higher than the Goodyear, Michelin and Continental, but like I said previously, it is an insignificant amount in the real world. Great job, Pirelli. Now, as I am the first person in the world to have tested this tyre, you might be wondering if this is a one-off. Maybe Pirelli have just made this tyre work really well in this size, but not in others. I don't believe that, and here's why. I happened to be at a public proving ground at the end of 2023, where Pirelli were there also testing the new PZ5. Pirelli asked me if I wanted to test a couple of the near final specifications of the tyre because they wanted to find out which specification I preferred. I believe it was just a couple of belt angle differences between the sets, the compounds were the same. Not only did they have the two versions of the PZ5 for me to play with, but there was also the SportContact 7 and the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S as a benchmark for me to test against. Obviously I said yes, who's going to say no? So I ran dry and wet handling, and in this scenario the PZ5 was even further ahead of the Continental and Michelin than I found in this test, and the steering just felt super perfect. Why am I telling you this? We were testing in 235/35/19, which is a different tyre size, so I do believe the new P Zero is legitimately this good. Recently, Pirelli are definitely on a roll with the updates they're making to their aftermarket range of tyres, and the PZ5 continues that dramatic improvement by winning the test. I look forward to seeing other tests of it in the future, which I will of course cover on tyrereviews.com. Any questions, please do ask below. You can support Tyre Reviews and independent tyre testing on Patreon, also linked in the description. Go review your tyres at the Tyre Reviews website, and as always, safe motoring.